Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, June 18th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have lots of stuff to talk about today. Obviously, all kinds of breaking news all around the world here. The phone lines are open. The phone system is working again today. The number is 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, the big story today was this tragic shooting at a church down in South Carolina, and 9 people were killed. They have arrested the shooter, 21-year-old white guy, Dylan Storm Roof, if you can actually believe that last name. And when we first heard about the shooting, we said, oh, they're going to find some way to blame it on the Muslims. But they've got this guy out here, and it is a horrible, horrible tragedy. And as is typical of the media and politicians, everybody is jumping on board this story for whatever their agenda is. The black leaders are out there saying that, oh, this is racism, and the gun grabbers are out there saying, see what happens, when the guns, if we don't ban guns, we're going to have more of these shootings. We'll have more about that aspect of it. But, of course, when I first heard the details of the shooting, the first question I asked, what medications was this guy on? And it turns out that he was on multiple psychiatric medications. It's being reported in the local media down in Charleston. The corporate national news media is not mentioning this aspect of it. But classmates of this Dylan Roof saying he was using a lot of drugs. He'd been arrested for illegal possession of a drug that helps cure opiate addiction. So this guy was heavily into drugs, was described as a pill popper. One drug that was specifically mentioned was Xanax, and then the guy goes on stuff like that. So this guy was on multiple prescription psychiatric medication. Now, Xanax is the one they named. And Xanax is prescribed to treat panic disorder and serious anxiety. It's accommodative, and it's often prescribed in conjunction with SSRIs to mitigate some of the side effects that SSRIs can trigger. And even without SSRIs, Xanax has been linked to episodes of extreme violence and suicide. In fact, when I posted this story about the Xanax to Facebook, somebody else posted a comment from a former Xanax patient. Quote, that's one of the reasons I had to stop taking that blank Xanax, was fueling homicidal thoughts in my mind, thinking people were out to harm me or there's a conspiracy going on. I had no filter or remorse in my mind. I fantasized about harmful, spiteful blank. Wow, it's just too obvious. And I got other comments along the same lines. It's a very, very addictive drug. There are actually support groups for people who are trying to kick Xanax, and that's the only drug that we know specifically he was taken. But the indications from his classmate is he was on a bunch of different medications. So they're out there talking about, the hate crime. Everybody's in there trying to get political hay for it, if you will. Al Sharpton, of course, was immediately over there. Oh, this is racism. And, of course, the shooter was quoted as saying, all you people, meaning the black people in the church, have to go. You're wrecking the country. You're raping our women, and you blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's almost like it was scripted. And even though this guy was on the medications, I would not rule out that this was another staged event to try and fan up a race war, as we have seen with Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, all these other cities where they're trying to just push this race button as hard as they can. And when you look at FBI undercover informants who are setting up patsies, they're going to be drawn to kids who are on these medications because they know people on these medications can be talked into committing acts of violence that people who are not on those medications are going to be a little bit reluctant to get involved in. So everybody's treating it like a public relations opportunity. And not too surprisingly, Barack Obama was out there, you even heard it in the SRN news break, calling for massive gun control. We've got to take away all the guns if we're going to stop this senseless violence. Hillary's also out there. So, oh, we've got to get the guns. Now, the absurdity of that is illustrated by a simple question. How different would this story be if just one of those people in the church had been carrying a firearm? You'd have only one dead body, the bad person, and all the good people would still be alive. Those 9 people are dead in part because they believed the government would keep them safe from maniacs whose brains are fried on prescription psychiatric medication. And this story illustrates one more time. The police are never going to be there when these incidents actually occur. They show up afterwards to get their picture taken with the dead bodies and get their face in the newspaper and act like they're significant to what's going on. But if just one of those people in that church had had a weapon, it would have been vastly different. This shooting at the church is not justification for more gun control. It is justification for open carry and freedom to keep and bear arms, to deal with these people who are on too many of these medications. And I'm not the only person who's out there suspicious about just how quickly the FBI got involved, and Obama's in there, and Sharpton's in there, and all these other people. Story out of Anurfan Blogspot, Charleston Church False Flag Conspiracy. And again, we know that these undercover FBI informants are out there trying to find patsies they can set up. And they're going to be drawn to kids on these medications because they can be talked into doing these kinds of things. Now, the authorities are now saying they're going to focus on Dylan's associations and his social media. They're going to start spinning this, that this was part of a racist conspiracy. Well, if they're going to be going after his social media, that won't take very long because Dylan Roof's Facebook page only has 2 entries in it. It appears to have been created just a couple of months ago. And the 2 entries, basically, the first one is that picture that's now all over the media of Dylan standing there in his jacket, and he's got on the jacket 2 flag patches. One is the flag of apartheid South Africa, and the other is the flag of Rhodesia. It looks like costuming for a really cheap motion picture. So this guy does feel like he's manufactured. The story feels manufactured. So, anyway, like I said, everybody is trying to fan this for whatever their agenda is. So there's this guy, Dr. Randy Short. He's a member of the Black Autonomy Network Community Organization, and he's out there saying that the white people are waging a war on African Americans. And he's saying, we're going to have no help from anywhere except for God and ourselves. So they're trying to fan this up into a new race war already. Stinks to high heaven. All right, apparently there were shots also fired into a church in Memphis, Tennessee last night. Nobody was hit. They don't know who the shooter is. It's just bullet holes in the front of the church. And it does seem to be kind of an epidemic sweeping the globe because Jewish settlers burned and destroyed a Catholic church on the banks of the Galilee Sea. It's the church where tradition says Jesus did his thing with the loaves and the fishes. And they arrested 16 people and then immediately let them go for torching that church. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. I know we got a call waiting online, but it's a little off topic, so I'm going to wait till after we get into the next segment to take that phone call. And by the way, back in 2006, there was a church burned in Alabama. Didn't get any news coverage because the 3 boys who set it on fire were Jewish, and we don't want to upset them. All right, we're going to take a break for a commercial. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just now looking at this report from CBS that confirms Dylan Roof had a prior arrest for possession of illegal drugs. The drug in question was called Suboxone, and it's a narcotic that is used to treat opiate addiction, but it, too, is linked with outbursts of extreme violence and suicide. And there's a wonderful website called ssristories.org that is a collection of case studies of the links between prescription psychiatric medication and acts of violence. A lot of them are from these SSRIs, but not exclusively. And using their search engine for Xanax, they came up with a whole page of stories about this guy just murdered his wife, and he pled not guilty because he was on Xanax and he just flipped out. And there were no other reasons. It was a good marriage, no prior history of violence or anything. These are dangerous medications. And what's really angering is the United States Congress actually held hearings on this link between these dangerous psychiatric medications and acts of mass violence and suicide. And the lobbyists for the big pharmaceutical corporations came in, did what lobbyists did, and Congress basically did nothing. It's not a problem. We don't want to offend those people who write us those generous campaign donation checks every year. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Steve in California, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hello?
You're on the air. Steve?
Yes.
You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Okay. Well, I had two questions. First one being economic. Understanding that the NSA has so much data gathered on the citizens, financial reports, stuff like that, there's been a big push, I know all the, independent talk radio to buy gold and silver because that'll be the new standard for an economic collapse starting over. If they know of all the purchases you have of gold and silver, and the banks have to tell what's in your safety deposit box if you store it there or in your home, but they know your purchases. What's to stop it from happening again? What happened in FDR, the gold confiscation, happening all over again? They simply get your gold, silver, issue a certificate, and they prop their system up that way. What's to stop that from happening again?
Well, they're probably going to go ahead and do that again, but you need to understand a couple of things. First of all, if you buy your gold and silver in small amounts, there's a limit you have to cross before a report is filed. And if you pay for it in cash, then there is no record. A very good way to invest in silver is to go out to coin dealers, swap meets. Well, maybe not the swap meets. There's a lot of fraud going on. Even on eBay, and look for what is called junk silver coins. These are the pre-1965 American coinage that had silver in it. But these are coins that have no collectible numismatic value. And so you're basically buying them for the silver content. And nobody's keeping track of those. And the advantage of these junk silver coins in the event of an economic collapse, these are recognized known units of value that will be usable in commerce. Nobody's going to be doing conversions about what's this worth in Federal Reserve note dollars. The gas station will say gas is 25 cents a gallon again, and you pay for it with a silver quarter. And we'll be able to conduct our business without that private central bank nonsense anymore. But yes, for large bullion owners, people who are buying, large bars or the very large coins, yeah, there is a record being kept. And the question comes down to at what point is it profitable for the government to spend the money to kick down your door and take your gold versus you don't really have enough to make it worth their while. But yes, I'm absolutely certain at some point down the road, when this economy starts to come apart, they're talking about banning cash. Voices are already coming up saying that's not going to be workable. And yeah, I'm expecting them to say, turn in your silver and gold. We've got to save those poor, struggling banks. And already over on Wall Street, they're starting to write more editorials about how Wall Street needs more government bailouts if we're going to keep the system functioning for any time longer. And it's already not functioning. It's all being held together with fraud and illusion and hoaxes and all of that instantly created interest-free money pouring out of the Federal Reserve into the stock market to make it look like something positive is happening over there.
Well, it's interesting. The writers even be writing that right now because the market's been up the whole week and it's been looking really good, which I know it's artificially inflated, but it's amazing that they would, on the other hand, start writing stuff about when it happens as it's looking good right now, at least on paper it is. It's not true. I know it's not true.
Well, everybody knows it's not true. Everybody knows that all the way back to the Clinton years, the President's Special Working Group on the Markets, colloquially called the Plunge Protection Team, steps in to prop up the stock market and halt any kind of a correction. And, of course, in the process, they're crushing the short sellers. It is a form of cheating, but the government is allowed to cheat and you are not. But everybody understands they can't keep doing this forever. The inflationary pressure is starting to pile up. It is looking more and more like Greece is going to do something dramatic either this week or next. and they're not going to be able to contain the damage. And at some point, yeah, they're going to be talking about propping up what's left of the American financial system on the backs of the American taxpayer, and that includes outright theft of your tangible assets. I mean, look at the cops going around just grabbing money everywhere they can find it. They're operating on the same moral level as Sir Guy of Gisborne's thugs, riding across the countryside, stealing pigs and chickens and farmers' daughters whenever they feel like it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to share one other thing real quick. At my TSA experience last week, traveling across the country, from the inconsistencies in TSA and their searches, it's amazing. From Oakland, hands above your head, go through that special scanner, your shoes off, your boots off, your belt off, computer out of the case, the bomb residues to see if there's any residue on it, all that, and then flying out of Denver, none of that. Keep your shoes on, keep your belt on, keep your computer in this case, and walk through the scanner, and that's it, and get your bag on the other side and get going. It's amazing.
Yeah, it does vary from place to place, and I guess because it's all just an illusion anyway, it's there to basically make money for Michael Chertoff and his Chertoff group. But I remember when my wife and I went to New York for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, going out of Honolulu, man, we got mauled going through security. Coming back from New York, we just walked through the metal detector and we were on the plane, and that was it. That was the end of it. It was almost a shock to be treated like a human being for that return flight.
Well, it's amazing that the inconsistencies are allowed to happen, continue like that. I mean, it just tells you that the standard is not the same, and somebody in Denver understood that all that extra stuff didn't mean anything. And so it was just futile. And so stop it all, and get the passengers on their way.
Oh, but the security industrial complex has become a power unto itself, and they're going to go on selling security, fear, and on all the rest of that. Anyway, listen, we've got to take another break for commercials. Steve, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show today here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call because after this one I'm going to be getting into the war news, which is out there. So, Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm really upset, man. With all of this going on in South Carolina, they did it to us. They passed fast track, which means this whole trade agreement, it's not really an agreement. It's a sellout to the big corporations. It's going to go through. They've pretty much destroyed the United States of America today.
Yeah, how lucky for the House of Representatives there was a big distraction in the media, so nobody was paying attention while they ramrodded this thing through. And the reason they needed people to be not looking is the Congress basically changed their own rules, because when the fast track and the trade assistance bills were split in two, over in the Senate they're together, but in the House they were split in two. The rules say that they both have to pass before they can go to the president's desk for a signature, and the House simply voted to change the rule, saying, well, we're going to vote through the fast track and send that for a signature on the promise that somewhere down the road we'll figure out a way to get the trade assistance bill through, which means they can just drop it now. And that means there's going to be no money available for American workers who lose their jobs because of this Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Mike, I tell you the truth. I'm pretty much giving up on the country. I mean, we're being sold out. It doesn't seem like there's anybody that's going to do anything. Maybe a guy like Donald Trump can change things. I don't know. They've really given it to us. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, I don't count out the possibility the government wasn't behind this killing in the first place. I think this kid did it, but I think they supplied him with the drugs, and they knew the guy. They probably worked on him. They probably said they were some Klan or some Nazi party or something when they were actually government agents, and they talked him into, here, you could do this and blah, 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 blah. Because he was too stupid to even know anything that this was a historic black church and all that stuff. He couldn't have planned this on his own. I'm sorry, Mike, but I just believe more and more evil has taken over this country, and I don't know if there's any hope anymore. I really don't. I mean, I've just about given up. Pretty much. I've even told people on Facebook that I'm just pretty much going to withdraw from being concerned about the political thing, because the United States is dead. Pretty much, it's finished. I don't know if we can come back. I really don't think we can come back from this anymore.
Well, no, I both agree and disagree with you. I agree with you with the fact that we cannot go back from where we are now to what we were before. But I'm a little more optimistic because from where I sit, this economic system and this government are tearing themselves apart. And the lies and hoaxes are getting more and more extreme, further undermining their credibility. And I am still convinced that we are going to see the government in Washington, D.C. collapse the way we saw the former Soviet Union. And there's going to be about 3 or 4 months where we're going to have to take care of ourselves, our families, our friends, our neighbors, our local communities. And it's going to be very rough. Let's not kid ourselves. And then we'll form a whole new republic. We'll kick out the private central bankers, and we'll just start moving forward again. And again, look at the present Russian republics. Life there is much, much better than it was under the former Soviet Union. Even Putin's out there saying the former Soviet Union was junk. And I think we're going to go through that same evolution here. What we have to do is not give the government an excuse to declare a national emergency and martial law, which I think is behind all of these things, whether it's Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, Baltimore, and now this church down in this church shooting.
I know I'm concerned about that too, and we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready to fight if it happens. You know, I mean, 1776. It's unbelievable. Like Alex Jones said that time on Piers Morgan. You know, you try to take away our guns, 1776 is here again. But other than that, I mean, I don't know. Is there any way we can do anything still about this agreement? Is there any way that still can be stopped? Or is it
unfortunately, unless we all organize to make this an issue for next year's election, where we start calling all of our Congress critters and saying, if you vote in favor of this, I am not voting for you, and we just kick up a firestorm. Unfortunately, most of these politicians are convinced that if they have enough money in the campaign chest, victory is assured because they can hire the vote riggers. We really have lost control over our nation and our government. That being said, I'm definitely pro-gun. I'm a Second Amendment supporter. I have a partially completed firearm myself, but I think there's too much of an emphasis on guns in terms of the current context of our government being in trouble, because back in colonial times, guns were how you fought a war, to basically get the other person's ideas out of your government. But we have a new weapon today, and it's called the Internet. And that is what we have to guard and protect, our rights to freedom of speech on the Internet, because this war is not going to be won with guns and bullets. Okay? It's being won with facts and information and getting the word out. The current Internet in the United States is basically the inheritor of the samizdat that was operating in the Soviet Union that brought them down. And the samizdat operated entirely on fax machines. And it educated the Soviet citizens to just how corrupt and evil their government was. And once the people no longer trusted their government, it came collapsing down. And we're heading to that same direction right here. I mean, as bad as people feel about law enforcement in this country, they're still polling way ahead of either the U.S. government or the corporate media. And when you look at how badly or how angry people are with the police, you'll see that this government really has lost the war for the minds of America. And thinking they're going to get it back with bigger and scarier false flags is not going to work, because false flags only work when your people still trust what the government and the media says, and those days are gone.
Yeah, but it's the information war. You're right. But at the same time, we got to get on these what I call mainstream talk shows, and they're peddling the lies. I just heard Hannity before. That's how I found out this thing was. I wanted to see what it was about, this shooting on my way home from work, and Hannity was saying that the Democrats caved in. The Republicans caved into Obama again. Republicans didn't cave into anybody. They wanted this thing more than the Democrats did. Okay, that's a lie right there. Neither of these parties are good. They're both bad. They were both. They're both evil. They're both rotten. They're both traitors. Maybe because we don't have
these people in the corporate media are paid their huge multi-million-dollar paychecks not for telling the truth, but because they're very convincing liars. And everybody now knows that. We were talking earlier in the week about polls showing that only about 23% of the under 35 demographic watch the TV news anymore. They're all coming to the Internet to find out what's going on. But the corporate media is still out there trying to sell the lie, trying to prove they're still of use to the power elite. But their finances are drying up. Their advertisers are leaving. And these big budget talking head paychecks are going to go away because these people can't convince anybody anymore. And it is somewhat pathetic how they defend themselves. You remember the embarrassment with Brian Williams, who got caught in a lie, and they're trying to defend him by saying, well, he's not really a journalist or a reporter. He's just a performer, and therefore you shouldn't hold him to the high standards of being truthful, and so forth, which is really kind of a pathetic excuse because his whole thing is, I'm telling you what to believe and what to think, and now we know he's an absolute liar. And that's what they're paid to do. They're not paid. People who tell the truth do it for free. The big bucks go to the big liars.
You think it's paid to support Trump? I know he's a billionaire himself, but it's maybe like the Terminator. You know, you get the good Terminator to fight the bad Terminator, get the good billionaire to fight the bad billionaire.
Well, I got to tell you, if Trump were to win the White House, there would be hell to pay. And I'm not taking him seriously. I think they're putting Trump into the mix so that Hillary looks better by comparison. Oh, look how bad Hillary is. Well, could be worse, could be Trump. We got to take a break for commercials. Mark, thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're finishing up on this whole tragic shooting at the church, and everybody's leaping on board to push their agenda. Looking at this article over here about how now's the time to pass a hate crime bill in South Carolina. This guy just murdered 9 people. What good is a hate crime bill going to do? You're going to give him lethal injection twice? Lethally inject him, wake him up, and then shoot him full of drugs again? It's absurd. Everybody's just looking at an opportunity to push whatever their agenda is. Racism, gun bans, legislature, whatever. Now, turning over to the wars. Interesting story in RIF.com. Manufacturing non-existent Putin war on Ukraine. And they're basically calling NATO, the U.S., on this obvious propaganda campaign to say this is all Putin's fault, Russia's bad, Putin's bad, Putin, Russia, 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 Russia. And it's nonsense. The world knows Russia did not invade Ukraine. The U.S. overthrew the legitimate government. And that's what led to this whole mess. And the U.S. government is still out there trying to put the blame for their own foreign policy disaster onto Vladimir Putin. And as kind of a corollary, there's this very interesting article over at Russia Insider where the U.S. and NATO are trying to get everybody in Europe riled up for a coming war with Russia. And all the leaders of these countries over there are saying, you know, we'd like to sort of get excited about this, but Russia isn't invading. They're not making any moves to suggest they're invading. They're just sitting on their side of the border, minding their own business. And it's kind of hard to whip up support for a war against an invasion that just isn't actually happening. It's just a made-up threat out of thin air. Now, the U.S. is continuing to send weapons over to that part of the world. They're going to deploy a squadron of F-22 Raptor fighters in Europe. Russia is, again, saying, you are the provocateur here by putting all these weapons, artillery, F-22s on the ground near our borders. Think of how it looks to an objective observer around anywhere in the world here. One of the F-22 pilots was quoted as saying, "I can't breathe." 2 Ukrainian soldiers have confessed to the cold-blooded murder of 2 women in the Kiev-controlled portion of eastern Ukraine, suspected of separatism. The soldiers suspected these 2 women of not liking to be part of Kiev and shot them in the head with a machine gun. Comes under the category of winning the hearts and mind. Apparently an MRLS missile has hit the Donetsk chemical plant, which is always going to have serious secondary consequences for people living around that. Another interesting little article over here from liveleak.com. Anti-U.S. mood rising among the Kiev locals. More and more videos coming out of these protest marches in central Kiev, demanding the resignation of Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk. and the ouster of all the American assets there who overthrew their elected government. But remember, if you're a loyal American, you will believe they only hate us for our freedoms. They couldn't possibly hate us for going into their country, overthrowing their government, and putting in a junta and starting a civil war. No, that would be silly. They hate us for our freedoms. They hate us because we have Disneyland. They hate us because we have Miley Cyrus naked on a wrecking ball. That's why they hate us, and you should hate them back. John Kerry, apparently recovering from his accident, or shooting, depending upon who you're listening to, is apparently relaunching his campaign to come up with yet more excuses why we should invade Syria. He seems to not understand that we remember all the earlier lies about sarin gas and chlorine and all the rest of it, which turned out to be false flags by the hired mercenaries to blame on Assad. But, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. And Kerry is out there compiling evidence that will justify a direct U.S. military intervention into Syria using other people's children, of course. Britain is providing precision-guided weapons to the Saudi Air Force to use in targeting people in Yemen, I guess, here. Now, here's an interesting little story. The U.S. military is having to scale back drone attacks in Syria. Their pilots are facing burnout. They're working 12-hour shifts in their nice, comfy little Nintendo game air-conditioned trailers, 7,000 miles away, and it's starting to wear down on them. And because of that, the military is scaling back because they can't find anybody willing to go in there and do this remote-controlled war crime. The word is getting out as to what is really going on with the drone strikes. It's not heroic. It is not valorous. And there actually is a very interesting movie out called Good Kill. It's on cable right now. And it's a character study of somebody who went from being an F-16 pilot to a drone pilot and how it kind of messes with his head. And it's actually a pretty balanced look at what they're going through. I would definitely recommend grabbing that one. The U.S. Navy has changed their advertising agency following the debacle with the Global Force for Good, which absolutely cratered. And they complained that the problem with that Global Force for Good campaign, it showed Navy people handing out food packages and everything, and it wasn't motivating young men and women to want to act violently, which is what the Navy really does. The U.S. Navy is not a global force for good. The U.S. Navy is a facility for going to other people's countries and putting very large holes in other people's property. According to the latest United Nations report, 60 million people have been displaced by war last year. 60 million. It is, in fact, a world war. People who have been driven from their homes by all these conflicts being started up in this argument over whose piece of ink and paper we're supposed to be using. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing phone calls because we're keeping some of these people online way too long. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, I'm just looking at what's happening in Greece at the moment. They must be part of the Rivero's Rangers because they're now saying that this deal with Europe is illegal, illegitimate, and odious, their debt. So it looks like they've been listening to the show.
Well, yeah, no, they've had their lawyers looking at it, and yes, their parliament did pass a resolution going through the letter of the law, both of the Greek constitution, the charters of these lending troika, even the EU charter and the ECB charter, and saying that these money junkies have been breaking their own rules all along. And then, of course, there is that whole situation with Goldman Sachs and Papandreou that greatly exacerbated the situation. And with the Parliament making this resolution, it looks to me like Cyprus is basically about to deliver the great no, as we're seeing in all over places. And it's going to be a mess. Yellen is admitting there will be repercussions in the United States. Amazing gift of understatement. And I'm sure right now the sellers of all those credit default swaps against Greece's debt are trying to find some kind of legal justification where they can say, well, it doesn't really count as a genuine default if they just refuse to pay us, and therefore we don't have to pay the holders of the credit default swaps, which will get them off the hook for all that money that they don't actually have, but that in turn will probably crash the derivatives market. They're in a real corner here. That's why they're so desperate to try and get a world war going. They need a distraction. They need us all looking at bombs and dead bodies so we don't look back over at how Wall Street and Washington, D.C. destroyed what used to be the greatest nation on earth.
Becoming more interesting than that, because over here in Europe there are rumblings now from Portugal, Spain, Italy, of doing exactly the same thing as Greece on this odious debt. And it looks like the system is falling apart. Really getting interesting.
Well, when they created the European Union, they built in a self-destruct mechanism called the European Central Bank. And the problem is that private central bank caught up with them before they were able to complete the control of the European Union. That's the problem. If they'd started the EU with an honest money system, everybody would be happy, except the bankers. Anyway, listen, John, we got to take a break for our news. We're going to be away for about 7-8 minutes. Can you hold, and I'll bring you back as soon as we're done with the news.
Yeah, Michael, I'll hold.
All right, we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Don is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. We've got 2 calls waiting, and we're going to go right back now to John in Barbados. We're talking about the situation in Greece. Basically, today is the last day for them to reach some kind of a deal to avert default. So tomorrow may be very interesting. Maybe the reason they tried to run the American stock market up as high as they did today as kind of a buffer against cascading losses around the world. But at this point, it does look like Greece is getting ready to simply write off the debt as odious, and as John was mentioning, other member nations of the European Union are starting to say there is a legitimate legal ground for saying we don't owe all this money that the money junkies say that we owe. And of course, Christine Lagarde is out there saying, you will pay, we don't care how the debt was created. Once we've created it, you will pay, you are our slaves, grovel before the IMF. I may have gone a little overboard on that one. So, John, go ahead and pick up where you left off.
Well, I'm looking now at this referendum which is due to take place in Britain of whether to stay in or go out. Now, I've been watching Cameron's speech occasionally and using this voice stress analysis system. And quite frankly, this man is in a panic. He's terrified of this referendum. The vote riggers are already out there, you know, I mean, trying to, but the polls are suggesting actually that 65 to 68% of Britain won out. And so, it's going to be
Oh, yeah, but I mean, the polls were saying the people of Scotland wanted out, and look how they stole that one. You know, I think the people of Britain ought to be taking a very good look at those vote counters because, yeah, the British government will steal the election to get what they want. They did it to Scotland. They will do it to their own people without hesitation.
Well, I think the problem that the Conservative Party has, at least 25% of their majority of their MPs won out. And if this is seen to be rigged, I think this Conservative government will collapse within days because in Britain we can have a vote of confidence. And if that vote of confidence fails, the government gets thrown out. And there are enough people now in Parliament that don't like the EU. And that's a very likely scenario.
Well, that's kind of a universal attitude. Everybody in the European Union is looking at what a disaster the EU and, in particular, the ECB has been for ordinary people. But the European Union wasn't formed for the benefit of the people of Europe. It was formed to create a new population of prey animals for the European Central Bank.
Yeah, I mean, it started with the common steel policy in Europe and then eventually went to this European Union and common policies in agriculture and what have you. But it's gone further than that now. And of course, different nations have different economies and it just doesn't work all the way across Europe. It never has.
Well, if the EU falls apart, and it's looking like it might actually happen, it's going to be a serious blow to the globalists. I mean, they're so desperate now they've even got the Pope on board saying, yes, we must have a one world government. It's the will of God to have a global government here. And that's an argument of last resort in the modern day and age.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to bring in the imaginary playmate in the sky too.
Yeah, they can't sell it on the economics, they can't sell it on the politics, they can't sell it on the science, so we're going to go back to that tried and true method from the Middle Ages. It's God's will that you do what we tell you to do. And that is desperation on the cusp of madness.
Well, I think we're looking at a very interesting period from now until the end of this year. Things are going to be...
I think it's going to be a very interesting period between now and the 4th of July, and I just hope they're not going to try and set off a nuke someplace on the 4th of July to say, oh, we have to have a holy crusade against all the Muslims. John, I got to let you go. The phone lines are loading up. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to go to Andrew in New York. Andrew, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I remember once, Helmut Kohl, who was, the German chancellor, and when the European Union nations were, talking and forming and, they were arguing, he made one remark, the people were shocked. He said, if you don't go along with this, this is a matter between peace and war. And, everybody was looking at each other. We don't want a war.
Well, basically it's a political statement. Do what we tell you to do or there'll be a war. I mean, the Rothschilds did it to the early United States of America. And that's always the situation. In peacetime, do what we tell you, or we'll just set up a war and make things worse for you.
Also, I'm looking at, I have this feeling that Israel might do a false flag, the USS Liberty, where they'll blame it on Iran, and probably they'll send the U.S. troops to fight Iran.
Well, at this point, they're all in such corners. It almost feels like a false flag is now inevitable, and I'm sure they're thinking about it. And the only thing that is restraining them is the awareness that the people are not going to buy the official story right from the start, because Israel especially has gone to that same well way too many times. Lavon affair, attack on the Liberty, attack on the Cole, 9/11. And the people of the world understand what false flag attacks are and who uses them. It's not taught in the public schools for obvious reasons, but the people have picked up on it. False flag attacks. They even used them in ancient Rome to get the population motivated to go in a certain direction. It's what they do. And I think the awareness that the independent media is out here and that the majority of people are coming to the independent media to find out what's going on is probably the reason we haven't had a major false flag since the Boston bombing.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you. We're going to grab Charles in Vancouver. Charles in Vancouver, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Good to be on the show with you. Regarding these church shootings today, it would occur to me, and occurs to me of similar situations, that this guy was what I would call a Manchurian candidate, that he was groomed somehow or other, and then there was a trigger, and off he went. There was an incident in Canada, you may remember, about the fellow that beheaded somebody on a Greyhound bus. And my understanding of that event is that the passengers were watching a particular. They've all got video players on these buses now.
Yeah.
And there was a particular moment in the video that was being displayed, which triggered this guy to act. And I think this one was it in Charlotte? I haven't got the notes in front of me, but that's my view. What are your views on that?
Well, I mean, we know here in the United States of America, FBI undercover informants are always trying to cultivate potential patsies. They want to have an array of them, assets in place, and then when they decide they need to do something, they have the patsies ready to go. Every one of these so-called terror arrests we've had in this country for the last several years, it comes out 6 months later that they'd been put up to it by, an FBI informant. The two guys who shot up the cartoon contest in Texas, it came out that they were basically encouraged and maneuvered into it by an FBI informant. And as I said at the top of the show, FBI informants who are looking for people they can manipulate to commit acts of violence are going to be drawn to kids who are on these prescription psychiatric medications because it is notoriously easy to convince them to pick up a gun or a knife or a club or a bomb or whatever they want. So they're very, very useful tools for the propaganda. Charles, I need to let you go here. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to some of the other news here. Apparently, Greek President Alexis Tsipras is going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin tomorrow, and basically, Russia is rolling out the economic red carpet. Same thing they did with Cyprus. The U.S. is trying to make war. Russia is making deals. And Tsipras is basically showing all the signs that he is getting ready to tell the money junkies at the ECB and the IMF, the Troika, as it were, to just take a flying leap. They have built a legal case that Greece does not owe all the money junkies claim they do. And as John in Barbados pointed out, other nations in the European Union are taking a very good look at it because the legal problems that the IMF and the ECB and the European Commission have with Greece exist for the entire European Union. When they broke the rules for everywhere. And we could see the European Union start to fall apart. We could see Greece align with Russia. And boy, the war hawks are, Russia's invaded Greece. Russia's taken Greece. Well, we've got to go to war against Russia. The reality is this U.S. agenda of forcing the world back to Bretton Woods has failed. It is failing. They cannot possibly complete their plan, even with nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, we are in the group of a government institutionally incapable of admitting they've ever made a mistake or reversing course. We saw that with Obamacare, human-caused global warming. They simply cannot admit they were wrong. They're too much in love with their own egos, as it were. Alrighty, getting on back to other parts of the world. Interesting story just came out of Sputnik News. The Pentagon is announcing that Iraq will likely be split into 3 separate, smaller nations. And it's interesting, the Pentagon is coming out saying, well, we really wanted a unified new government after we trashed the place, but we're going to have to accept that the country is probably going to have to be broken into 3 parts. And it's crocodile tears, because breaking Iraq into smaller pieces, easier to push around and bully, was what Israel wanted all along. And it looks like ISIS, which we know was created and supported by the United States and Israel, was the tool to justify breaking Iraq up into little tiny pieces. And Israel wants the exact same thing for Iran. To take their regional, political, and economic rivals and smash them into little tiny pieces. As long as American kids get to be killed and crippled for it. Okay, now then, the U.S. Congress is condemning the academic boycott of Israel, proving once again that we do have a puppet regime in Washington, D.C. We're still seeing fallout from that stupid little cartoon that Israel's foreign ministry put out to basically insult Western media reporters by trying to claim that they were dupes of Hamas, or they were simply idiots and they don't understand what's going on in Gaza. And the backlash has been rather furious. Israel succeeded in further alienating the world's media against them. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is refusing a request by the United States to disavow Michael Oren's claim that Obama has abandoned Israel. And what's really kind of sick about this, Obama's job is the United States of America, not Israel. There is nothing in the Constitution that says the President of the United States has any obligation to any other nation on earth. And George Washington, in his farewell address, warned against foreign entanglements as a threat to the sovereignty of our nation. Some weird noises coming from outside here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin, are you there?
Hello, Mike.
There you are.
Mike, hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I was about to put your face on a milk carton.
Along with John Kerry. Hey, yeah, the West is a dying empire. You know, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, they need to look east. I mean, our time has come and gone, especially UK's. You know, we can't call ourselves the richest country in the world and be a debtor nation. We're a debtor nation. The UK's a debtor nation. The West is a debtor nation. When are people going to understand this? The power has shifted to the east. It's already shifted. It's already shifted.
Yeah, it has. It started shifting 30 years ago when we started losing our manufacturing to these other countries in Asia, because you cannot have a successful, prosperous nation without making products to sell, to power that economy. And Wall Street just decided they wanted to be the bankers to the world, which they could do under Bretton Woods, because everybody had to go through the U.S. dollar. Those days are also gone.
Exactly. And people need to remember this. 71 or 72% of our economy is consumption-based. Now, if we got all low-paying part-time jobs, people ain't going to be consuming.
That's exactly right.
Right there.
You know, and we're hearing all these Wall Street financial whiz kids are out there saying the problem with the economy is that you, the American people, aren't buying enough things. You have to go out and buy stuff. Where are we supposed to get the money? Well, that's your problem to figure out. That seems to be the attitude.
Well, we'll never be able to make back up the loss. You know, I mean, you look at unfunded liability and all the rest.
You can't. When you have a private central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, the debt is always greater than the available money supply. There is nothing you can do to balance those books. The debt just grows and grows and grows until it collapses the system, which is what's going on now. And thanks to economic globalism, they're all going to come crashing down together.
Checkmate Putin.
Actually, Putin's just an observer. You know, he's just off to one side saying, boy, this really is coming apart on them. You know, he's going to kick back with a vodka and a bowl of borscht and just enjoy the show.
Anybody from Greece who's listening, you know, I mean, or any leaders, you know, from the West, you know, like France especially, you know, it's time to just like move east. You know, I mean, that's where the power is now. That's the way it is.
Well, the big mistake our civilization has made was to allow bankers to become our rulers, because that's not what good governance is all about. Bankers rule for the benefit of the bankers. They always have, they always will. Period. End of discussion. The only legitimate form of governance is self-governance. We don't have that when we are debt slaves to a bunch of private central bank money junkies, okay? All right.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it. Dustin, we're going to have to let you go. Damien, we're going to have to put you on hold for another 4 minutes. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Damien in New York, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Anything for you. I don't mind waiting. Good to talk to you. What you were saying before about, did they actually do that? With Brian Williams, they actually said, you know, well, he's an actor. He's not necessarily.
They called him a performer. One of his defenders was out there saying that we.
Disclaimer underneath the news every time that, you know, don't believe what these people are saying. You know, disclaimer: the newscasters seen and heard are performers, not arbiters of the truth. And that sort of thing. They should have a disclaimer underneath.
Well, they should, but they won't. I mean, their job is to sell you things. This year's car, this year's personal electronic device, this year's fashions, this year's candidates, this year's wars.
Yeah. Well, what you were talking about with Dustin too, and yeah, Putin is he's positioning himself just in the best place that he can, and he's just going to sit back and let stuff implode. I still don't understand why Greece, am I wrong? Germany was supposed to pay Greece a certain debt that they never paid back.
That's
Am
right.
I wrong about that? Or?
No, you're absolutely right. There was
what happened with that?
Well, Germany just said, we're not going to pay it to you. Tough cookies, but you still owe us money. And that is another one of the issues that the Greek parliament has raised about the legitimacy of the debt owed to financial institutions in Germany, because Germany has yet to repay their debt for reparations from World War II.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say also, this is, you already know, and people who listen to this show know, and I was talking about yesterday, level of awareness. I didn't say that people, you came back on instead of saying that people were oblivious. I don't think they're oblivious at all. I just think that their level of awareness is slightly different, and also there's a little bit of denial going on, because if people actually believed in and understood what they became aware of, we wouldn't even see Hillary Clinton have any numbers whatsoever in the polls.
Her numbers are not good. Her numbers, especially in the swing states, are very, very bad. Her numbers are going down. Apparently, her campaign tour through California is being greeted with ridicule and derision. I'm working on a major overview of the Clintons' political corruption history. It's called The Epic of Clinton's Mess. And I may not, she may be gone before I can even finish the darn thing.
I can't wait for that. I cannot wait for that. The thing people have to really remember is that all these things with the banks and corporations, all these things, none of this would be able to happen if the government didn't enable these people and let them get away with it.
You're absolutely right. And the reason the Founding Fathers set the nation up the way they did was they knew political power attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't be allowed to have it. So they set up a governmental system where people in the government were constrained from being able to sell out the nation and its people. But over the last couple of centuries, and especially the last century since the Federal Reserve was created, the money junkies simply buy whatever candidates they need to serve their agenda. And over time, they've removed all the limits on campaign contributions, so political candidates don't even care about ordinary people anymore. They just go to the people with the big bucks who will give money to both candidates, so it doesn't matter how the people vote. The big banks still own the government.
I almost think what they should do is let's say you run for president, you become president. You only have 4 years, and the next cycle you cannot actually campaign and run. If you did a good enough job, people can vote for you. I think they should do that throughout. There should not be a person who's in office should not be making phone calls for campaign finance, et cetera, all these things, because they spend most of their time doing that with their helpers and everybody.
Well, let's be honest.
If they do a good job,
let's be honest and fair. The rules are they're not supposed to use their taxpayer-funded facilities for campaigning. They have to set up completely outside separate operations. Sometimes they don't, but those are the rules. And, Congress has scheduled recesses during which the members of Congress can go out and do whatever they want, including campaigning. Even when the country was first started, being a member of Congress was not a full-time job. They only met occasionally to deal with the pressing issues, and then they all went back to their normal businesses. The people who started the United States of America were not professional politicians or professional ruling class. They were businessmen. Ben Franklin was a publisher. Thomas Jefferson was a lawyer. John Hancock sold insurance. Paul Revere was a silversmith. Josiah Bartlett was a doctor. These were people who knew how to actually get things done that society needed. And that was what our government was supposed to be representative of, not just a collection of 500 inherited rich people, lawyers, and the rest of that. And, we have really gone far afield from what the designers of this nation intended. And even Thomas Jefferson did not expect the government he designed to last more than 100 years. And it lasted longer than he predicted.
That mindset that you're saying, that these are people that they knew how to do a job and get the job done. Just even that end of it. Like, these people did this job, they were businessmen. That ethic, that work ethic, is not even part of the
And it's one of the reasons so many bad laws get passed, because we have people passing laws on the Internet who don't use it themselves, who know nothing about computers. Remember when they were talking about the Internets, or it's just a bunch of tubes, or Al Gore claiming that he invented the Internet? I mean, they're just full-time politicians. They're liars, cheats, self-aggrandizing opportunists. And that is exactly the kind of people we should never, ever allow in our government.
Yeah. They just take advice from people who they claim, or I don't even know.
They take advice from people who write really big checks is what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for everything you do.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Now, we're seeing another report out of Sputnik News. The director of the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, John Smith, I hope that's his real name, is saying the United States is prepared to ramp up even more sanctions on Russia if conditions in Ukraine continue to deteriorate. And again, Russia has nothing to do with the situation in Ukraine. This was all caused by the U.S.-backed coup d'etat against Ukraine's legitimate government January of last year that has led to this humanitarian tragedy. But the propaganda is, it's Putin's fault, it's Russia's fault, we're going to punish them more, we're going to have more sanctions here. Now, the sanctions against Russia provably have caused more economic harm to Europe, South America, Canada, and the U.S. than to Russia. So by all means, let's go on and do more of the same thing because we're the U.S. government and we can never, ever admit that we've made a mistake or had any of our policies fail and backflash on us. There's way too much ego in Washington, D.C. for this government to even be seen as sane anymore. Alan Dershowitz is out there campaigning against the Iran deal, saying that if the U.S. makes a deal with Iran, the P5+1, it'll put America on its knees. And they're out there, he's out there saying that this deal will allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon in 10 years, which is exactly the opposite of what the deal is supposed to be doing. But at this point, they're just desperate to find some way to keep this from happening. And I would not be surprised if Israel sets off some kind of a dirty bomb or a nuke bomb someplace and says, Iran did it. Go hurt them. Go hurt them. They're the bad people. Because we know that Israel has been building and test detonating dirty radioactive bombs in the Negev. And that's usually a prelude to a false flag. Remember, before the Oklahoma City building blew up, the BATF was building and test exploding truck bombs out in New Mexico. The guy in charge of that BATF program was 1 block away from the Murrah building when it blew up. Made the first official phone call saying, oh my goodness, the Murrah building has been blown up by a truckload of ANFO. It's really obvious what's going on if you look at it objectively and stop believing as you are told to believe. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, the Federal Reserve yesterday declared they were not going to raise the interest rate on money that they lend to financial institutions. It's basically been close to zero for 6 years now. They haven't raised the rates once during that time. Every time they come out to one of these quarterly meetings, they say, will they raise the rates or won't? And the stock market gets driven up and down in crazy cycles, which if you understand what's going on and you are a speculator, you can make a huge amount of money riding that chaos. Speculators do not like a stable, calm stock market. They want as much volatility as they possibly can because they can ride the straddle and make huge amounts of money for which nothing of any real value is returned to society. They're simply looting the stocks being traded from both the investors and the issuing companies. Well, there's a new wrinkle in this whole thing. The fact that the Fed didn't raise rates is not newsworthy, but it's starting to come out why they can't. And it goes back to that issue of derivatives. We've talked about this before. A derivative is a general category of financial instrument whose value is dependent on other financial instruments. Short selling is a form of derivatives. Credit default swaps are derivatives. And it turns out there's another little beast they've been playing with for quite some time called the interest rate derivative, where people will buy one of these interest rate derivatives that will pay off if interest rates go up. And apparently the total global exposure for all these money junkie central banks for interest rate derivatives stands at $555 trillion with a T. When the Fed raises interest rates, there's going to be another major problem. They've got themselves into a corner. There was a reason why derivatives were originally banned. And the money junkies love it because when the economy is growing, when it's improving, derivatives can make you a huge amount of money very quickly for very little effort. When the economy turns against you, the derivatives come back with a vengeance, and that's where we are right now. When the economy was booming up, Wall Street went to Washington, said, we want to trade in derivatives, and we don't need to be regulated. We'll take care of it. We'll keep an eye on it. And derivatives are very unregulated. They're not like real insurance. Real insurance has rules. I can buy a fire insurance policy on my own home, an asset that I own. I cannot buy a fire insurance policy on my neighbor's home. You have to own the asset being insured. Otherwise, go over the middle of the night with a can of gasoline and a road flare and collect the money. Common sense. And insurance companies are required by law to keep cash reserves on hand to pay a reasonably expected number of claims that will come in. Again, common sense. Derivatives don't have those rules. You can buy a derivative on assets you do not actually own. And the companies selling the derivatives are not required to keep cash reserves to pay claims coming in. That's what happened to AIG. When the mortgage-backed security fraud collapsed in 2008, everybody was coming in to cash in their credit default swaps on those mortgage bundles, and AIG folded. They didn't have the money. And they dumped the losses onto the American taxpayer. We know that there are trillions in credit default swaps against Europe's debt, including Greece, and now we're finding out there's an insane amount of derivatives based on interest rates around the globe. We're talking 7 times the entire global gross domestic product hanging out there as derivatives exposure. In other words, there isn't enough money on planet Earth to pay these derivatives off. And that's why the Federal Reserve is in serious trouble. They can't raise the interest rates. They're stuck. They're in a corner. Very quick little story from over at Brass Check TV. They put up a video earlier in the day challenging the official narrative of this tragic church shooting in South Carolina, suggesting it was some kind of a false flag. Apparently, Facebook has now banned them from posting to their own Facebook page. Because Facebook doesn't like it when you challenge the official government narrative of things. And by the way, I posted a couple of my observations to Facebook, and the hired shills are jumping all over me with the usual, oh, you're a kook, you're a nut, you're wearing a tinfoil hat, so forth and so on. All right, we're going to grab a phone call before we hit our news break at the top of the hour. Randy in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about Dylan Roof's Facebook page. You had a link on it?
Yes.
And I currently cannot find it. Is there any way that you can...
Imagine my shock.
Yeah, I know.
Well, like I said... Is
there any way you can put up a link to that Facebook page, like through the Wayback Machine or anything like that?
Well, it may not be in the Wayback Machine because it looks like it was only created a couple of months ago. And it doesn't really matter anyway. The fact that they took it down... the word is out. There was nothing in there except the one picture of Dylan with his jacket with the apartheid patches on it, and that was it. Oddly enough, though, his Facebook page had a huge number of friends of all different ethnicities, which doesn't really work for somebody that you're claiming was this fanatical racist.
Yep. Yeah, this whole narrative's falling apart like a rotten pumpkin.
Well, the little egg timer has already run out on this one.
Yep. Seems like you only got a few grains of sand through the egg timer.
Well, this one, I didn't even have to let it run all the way out. But we're at that stage right now. The lifespan of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer.
Yep. All right. Well, that was all I was wanting to know.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And remember, politics is perception. People may not know exactly what happened in that church, but they know the government and the media lie, they take advantage of, they exploit, they push agendas. If people aren't going to accept the official story, then the whole point of a false flag is lost. And the reason I am concerned about this is we have seen multiple efforts over the last couple of years to try and trigger a small, controllable, manageable uprising of some kind to justify a national emergency and a declaration of martial law. We saw that with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, who, as you heard on the SRN news break, they're now saying that this Dylan Roof was incensed about Zimmerman and identified with him and all the rest of this. We saw it with the events in Ferguson, events in Baltimore. They've been trying to spin the police brutality against the American people as white officers against black victims, but the reality is the police are killing more white people than black, but they're constantly spinning racial war, racial war, racial war. They're trying to kick something up, and so far it's not working because the black people of America and the white people of America are smart enough to realize that is what the government wants. Violence in the streets is not going to help the white people. It certainly won't help the black people. It helps the federal government shred what is left of the Constitution. And I hope you will make a point of sharing that observation with all of your friends on social media and email. Don't get sucked into doing what the government wants you to do so that they can take away what's left of our freedoms. Okay, we're coming up on the top here. We already talked about the Greek Parliament coming out with a legal document saying we don't actually owe all that money. The Greek people are apparently stashing 10,000 euro bundles in their homes in anticipation of a possible Greek exit. There are indications that there may even be an attempted coup d'etat against Tsipras because opposition figure Yanis Stournaras is out there basically making unconstitutional press statements about how the Syriza party has to go. And with this much money on the line, with the entire cohesiveness of the European Union at stake, I would not be surprised if the U.S. was in Athens right now trying to figure out how to bring down their elected government and put a new obedient puppet into power there, because that's what the U.S. does. They've done it to 50 countries since the end of World War II, and that is the real reason the world hates us. Russia is out there denying U.S. claims that their purchase of a gold bullion represent an attack on the U.S. dollar, saying other countries have larger reserves than we do. We're just diversifying our assets out of the dollar into gold, which is a rational thing to do. Got to take a break for the news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645 here. Now, let's see. Along with the increasing sanctions that the U.S. is getting ready to lob at Russia, trying to provoke them to doing something. You know, more sanctions. You're going to do something now, Putin? Huh? We're going to call you bad names. We're going to say you got an ugly dog. We're going to do more sanctions until you do something we can use to claim that you are the cause of the new World War or the new Cold War. Apparently, Russian assets have now been frozen in France and Belgium. Moscow is appealing this through peaceful, lawful channels. But that's exactly what's going on. They're trying to provoke Russia into doing something that can be seized on as the reason why we must all have a war with Russia. Now, over at 12160, they have a story which kind of illustrates how silly this all is, where President Obama, president of a country, $18 trillion in debt, presumes to lecture Vladimir Putin about the Russian economy. And the story is not complete because that $18 trillion is the official U.S. government debt, which if you have been watching the website over at the U.S. Treasury, that number's been frozen for 3 months, which tells us the U.S. government has actually gone above its legal debt limit, but doesn't want you to know about it. And of course, the $18 trillion does not include over $150 trillion estimated in unfunded liabilities by the U.S. government, does not include state debt, does not include corporate debt, does not include private debt. Now, the U.S. likes to call itself the richest nation on earth because we've got the top 1% of the 1% who are doing really, really well. But that previous caller was absolutely right. When you include the indebtedness of the nation, we are not a rich nation. Not at all, no matter how many multi-billionaires we wag about to reassure everybody that the economy is really hunky-dory, and if you're going hungry and jobless and homeless, it's really all your fault, so stop protesting in front of all those Wall Street banks. Wall Street, believe it or not, I mentioned this earlier in the show, there's an editorial out in the New York Times written by Catherine S. Wild, who was actually on the board of directors of the New York Federal Reserve back in 2008, is out there saying it is time for the U.S. government to pour more taxpayer money into Wall Street. Wall Street is important. Wall Street is the entire universe. You've got to take more money away from the American people and give it to the Wall Street banks so the banks can loan it back to the American people at interest, which is a very good definition of what a bailout is. And this is after all the money that has already been taken from you and given to the bankers. And what did they do with it? Wrote themselves huge paychecks and bonuses. Now they're in trouble again. Their solution is always go to the U.S. government, take more away from you. And then they wring their hands and cry that we don't have the money to go into the shopping malls and buy what they're selling. Well, you already took all the money. You can't run an economy with all the money just in a few pockets at the very top. For an economy to work, it has to be a system, and that means currency has to flow at all levels of the economy into all necessary areas of economic endeavor and investment. That's the only way to get it to work. Our economy is unstable because everybody on Wall Street and Washington, D.C. is focused on sucking money out of the top of that pyramid, and nobody is working to organize our economy in such a way that ordinary American workers can trade their labor and skill set for new wealth to pour back in to the bottom of the pyramid to keep the cycle going. And that is the primary failure of the U.S. federal government. They're just looking the other way and say, we don't have to worry about it. The American people will figure out some way to come up with some new money to pour into the system. We just have to kick back with our buddies on Wall Street and live the life of Riley here. And it isn't working. And so what does Wall Street do? They send out this former New York Fed director, Catherine Wild, to write an op-ed in the New York Times saying the government has to give Wall Street more of your money. That's the only solution. We can't let Wall Street collapse. We can let the rest of the nation descend into third world squalor, poverty, hunger, and homelessness. That's fine. That's what the people are for. But we have to just always prop up Wall Street. If you want to talk about a segment of the population that's in denial, it is those Wall Street money junkies. They still don't want to look at the reality of the 11th marble, and that 11th marble is now about the size of Jupiter and rolling down the street heading for them. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Government debt threatens to send U.S. economy into death spiral. Threatens? It's already there. And there's been yet another banker death. J.P. Morgan's Jimmy Lee died yesterday. Now, he was in his 60s, but they say the death was unexpected. Okay, let's see. Here's another article also from Investment Watch blog. Lost American Dreams, the debt-based monetary system and horrendous crimes of politicians are turning elders from wise and respected to insignificant slave labor. And we're seeing that. People who should be in their retirement years are working menial minimum wage jobs. Fast food restaurants, retail stores. The new policy, apparently, in the U.S. government is work them until they drop. We don't want to have to pay for that silly retirement thing. We're grateful for all the money you poured into the Social Security Trust Fund, but we had to spend it on something else. We're sorry. And if you are somebody who is retired or about to retire, there's something you need to keep in mind. That money that you have put into the Social Security Trust Fund is your property. It doesn't belong to the government. Social Security was set up where you would entrust the U.S. government with your money for them to invest it to pay you dividends when you retired. It wasn't the government's money to simply grab and spend elsewhere. But starting with the Clinton administration, that's exactly what they did. That's where Bill Clinton got his magic federal government budget surplus. was out there saying, it's all about the economy. I'm really good. I have a federal government budget surplus. And he got that surplus by literally embezzling the retirement funds of the American workers. Took that cash, put it in the general ledger, spent it as general revenues, replaced it all with special issue treasury bonds, which the government cannot redeem. And that's why they're raising the retirement age, looking at higher taxes to pay for retirement, because they already spent the money they took from you once, so they're just going to take a little bit more and then give it back to you out of the generosity of their heart. And there's something that you need to understand as we get into this enforced dependency on the government. When you take your money and use it to live on, you get 100% of that money. When the government takes away your money and then hands it back to you, you don't get it all back because there are administrative costs and we've got to have salaries for all these officials and paper pushers. So they'll take 100% of your money and give you back maybe 60% of it, not even that, 50% of it. It's just another scam. We would be much better off just keeping our money in our own pocket and taking care of ourselves and, yes, our less fortunate neighbors and friends. But when the government takes all the money and then doles it back to you, you don't get it all back. That's just an absolute irrevocable truth about this mandated government dependency. Look at the disaster they had with Obamacare. Health insurance is more expensive, sky-high deductibles, you get less value for money, but by golly, that's our policy and we're sticking with it. Now, as mentioned on the SRN Newsbreak, while the corporate media was distracted with the shooting at the church, the House approved the fast-track bill, and they did it by changing the rules. And what kind of a government do you have when the politicians just change the rules to get what they want? It's not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's tyranny. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Pardon me, Wes in Idaho. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Tried to call in when you had Alex Newman on yesterday. The 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto is public schools. Read NEA Trojan Horse in American Education by Bloomfield many years ago. Got the local library to carry the new book, Crimes of the Educators. Chapter 18, that was what I wanted to bring up, subject on the Michael Rivero show. It is destroying child's religious beliefs is a spiritual crime. And what it's pointing out is that going to the teaching of evolution did away with values that child needs.
Well, let me step in here, Wes. Chapter 18 is the one area in which I disagreed with Alex Newman because I hold to this idea that church and state should be separate. And schools are supposed to be teaching the real world. If you want to learn about angels dancing on the head of a pin, there are places called churches which get very generous tax exemptions for people to get in and talk about the imaginary playmate in the sky. I don't see religion as an appropriate subject for any school because you get into the argument of just whose religion should you be teaching, and that is what leads to civil unrest in so many other countries throughout history.
It's pointed out that the Bible is not permitted in public school. When Commander David Scott of the Apollo 15 left the Bible on the moon, I'm wondering what kind of paper would have survived the moon's temperature of, 250 degrees. And further, he goes on to say that you want to improve the mental health of children. You teach them that they have been created by a loving God and that they are not...
Okay, well, that's his personal opinion, okay? And again, we have to be very careful here. People's personal opinions about religion are respected and protected in this country. What is forbidden is to use any instrument or institution of the government to mandate one particular religion over another. In the First Amendment, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an institution of religion. That gets misquoted a lot by pro-religion people. It's always quoted as government shall make no law regarding an institution of religion. That's not what it says. It says the government may not respect any one religion over any other. And the way the Founding Fathers guaranteed religious freedom for all was to make sure that no one religion had access to civil power, to have that wall of separation. Because these were all people for whom the religious upset in Britain was recent family history. And even in the early United States, there have been several terrible incidents of religious rule leading to problems. There was the Salem witch trials. There were literally one religious group in Pennsylvania tried to sell another religious group into slavery. I mean, that's how completely out of control it was. If you want to protect religious freedom for all, you must deny all religions access to civil power. And that's why, if you want to have the Ten Commandments in your home, that's fine. I'm opposed to having the Ten Commandments in a civil public building because you get into an argument about which version of the Ten Commandments is supposed to be there because they're actually different from one religion to the next.
David Barton is kind of an expert on the First Amendment.
You're not actually listening to me on this, are you? Wes, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I disagree with you, and in this book that Alex Newman co-authored, that one chapter I also do disagree with. So thank you very much. We're going to let you go here because I need to get back into the real world. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Hillary Clinton's poll numbers in the swing states are not very good. And basically the latest Quinnipiac University poll shows that a majority of voters in the swing states view Hillary Clinton as untrustworthy. This is, again, in contrast with the declaration by Hillary's campaign manager that there are no polls saying that that people think she's untrustworthy. And of course, we had a poll on that very question at our website, and it came back, the usual overwhelming majority that she's untrustworthy, and then there were a total of 9 votes, which I presume are the people who are monitoring my website on behalf of Hillary, because she knows that I don't send her a Christmas card every year. Very interesting story just came out over at mintpressnews.com. Vocative reported Tuesday that an analysis of Hillary Clinton's Twitter followers by Twitter Audit shows that she has more fake Twitter followers than any other candidate running for president. Which we know, they all do that. We were talking yesterday about these companies in Asia that you will pay them money and they'll create fake Facebook profiles and like your articles up to the very, very top. It's all for sale. Speaking of for sale, the story is now out that Donald Trump paid all those people who were cheering during his announcement of running for office. They all got $50. And they were there for a little less than 3 hours, and they got $50 for sitting there and going, "Yay, the Don." Now, on a more serious note, over at Breitbart, they're reporting how Democrats are pushing for $130 million to be budgeted for health care for illegal alien children. And we have a situation right now where legal American citizens born in the United States of America have been forced to buy those expensive Obamacare health insurance policies and then have been driven into bankruptcy because those policies have sky-high deductibles and don't cover the cost of all their medical care. But the illegals get their medical care for free. How does this make any sense at all? We should, all of us, 330 million Americans, immediately renounce our U.S. citizenship and become illegal aliens right here where we live, because we're going to get a much better deal from the U.S. government than we do as actual U.S. citizens. The U.S. government's attitude seems to be that we've already got you, you're a citizen, we can do what we want with you, but we've got to be nice to the illegals because we're trying to lure them in. Now, apparently, the U.S. government, not happy with trying to limit our gun rights, especially in the wake of that church shooting, is now proposing unified U.S. laws regarding knives, because people with knives are seen as a threat. And they want to have knives with mandated safety covers and various other things like that. Now, keep in mind, the Second Amendment reserves to the people the right to keep and bear arms. Doesn't say firearms, says all arms. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Miller that the Second Amendment reserves to the people the right to keep and bear the same arms as the uniformed military, who have knives, bayonets, and even swords. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to close the phones off for the rest of the program. I got a lot of stuff I need to get through in a very short amount of time, and I'll probably have to take some of this into tomorrow's program as well. Story coming out over at governmentslaves.info. The hunt for cash. Police have become revenue agents with guns. It is now open truth across the country that the police are out there just grabbing money to fund their departments, to fund the city, county, state governments. They're just grabbing it under any pretext whatsoever. Illustrating that is a story from offthegridnews.com, where the federal government took $11,000 from a guy traveling through the airport on the claim that his luggage smelled like marijuana. Now, this is a college student, Charles Clark. He was stopped at the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport. He was on a flight. He had his entire life savings of $11,000, and he had the money with him because he was in the process of moving. The police found no drugs on this guy. He was never charged with a crime. The police simply helped themselves to his life savings. Now, I seem to recall something over there in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights about no man's life, liberty, or property will be taken without due process. I don't think a cop thinking he smells the odor of marijuana on a particular piece of luggage is due process. Maybe that would be justification for searching the luggage, but if they didn't find drugs, there's nothing there. I mean, they're completely out of control, and they're off the constitutional reservation here. Let's see. Apparently over in Patterson, New Jersey, police officer got into an accident and killed a 23-year-old pedestrian, left the scene of the crime. Now, if there's somebody who should understand that when you are in an accident, you don't leave the scene of the crime, it should be a police officer. And we have another one of these tragic shooting stories. This one is just too bizarre. And it has to do with this dog owner. Tyler Muzzy is his name, and he saw somebody sneaking around the neighbor's home. So Muzzy called the neighbor and then called the police to say, there's a suspicious guy around my neighbor's home. The police showed up and arrested the man who'd been seen around the neighbor's home. He had broken into the house. He was a criminal, and all was well and good at that point. And then all of a sudden, Tyler Muzzy, who had called the police to report the suspicious activity, heard gunshots and was told that his dog, who was on a leash in his own backyard, had been shot and killed by the police, who felt threatened by this dog on a leash in the backyard of the house next to the house where they were supposed to be working. It's absurd. And you know, more of this stuff happens, people just aren't going to call the police anymore. This guy called the police. See something, say something. There's somebody breaking into my neighbor's home. I will call the police, and the police come over, and yes, they get the criminal, and then they turn around and kill the dog of the guy who called them in. Another story over in SueToday.com. Up in Ontario, police surrounded this building for 17 hours before they finally realized there wasn't actually anybody inside. They were out there with all their guns and stuff, and we're here, come on out. He's remaining silent. And basically they just had a 17-hour standoff with absolutely nobody. Now, there's a very alarming article over at theinternationalman.com, and it has to do with the city of Inkster, Michigan, where there was another case of police brutality. It was documented on video. The police officer did lose his job and has been charged with mistreatment of a prisoner. Now, the prisoner who was mistreated sued the city, and the city settled for $1.4 million. Where are they getting the $1.4 million? They're not taking it from the police department. They just raise property taxes on everybody. And of course, we, the people, are more than willing to have more of our money taken away from us with nothing of any value coming back to pay for the failure of the government to restrain the police and keep them in compliance with the law. No matter what happens, ordinary people are forced to pay for it. Police out of control, get sued, make the people pay for it. Wall Street failure, corruption, make the people pay for it. The poor are always made to pay for all. There is no justice. I mean, that's an illusion. The strong take, the weak surrender, until you reach a point where the force of necessity on both sides is in balance. When the greed from the rich meets the unrestrained anger of the poor with equal force, then the illusion of justice and fairness is entertained, and not before. Now, over in Old Priory Primary Academy in Plimpton, in Great Britain, children have now been banned from doing handstands and cartwheels at the school because they might get injured. I mean, this is the nanny state out of control. I mean, when I was a kid, we did handstands, cartwheels, we tumbled, somersaults, we climbed trees. Yeah, we'd get hurt. We'd get a scrape, get a cut, get something like that. Get a little mercurochrome on there. It was our badge of honor. You know, look at that. I did that falling out of the tree. And we're already seeing all these people screaming about the sedentary lifestyle that is caused by access to personal electronic devices. And here we have a school saying, well, you're sedentary and you're weak and you're fragile, so we're just going to make you more of the same. Doesn't make sense. Story out of alternate.org is suggesting that the government of California may have broken its own laws to open up 400,000 acres for further development of fracking. Now, down in Arlington, Texas, as if they didn't have enough problems from the storm they're dealing with, there was a 42,800-gallon fracking fluid blowout. Went into the streets, into the storm sewers, into the streams, creeks, ponds. Not to worry, the EPA is insisting that this is all perfectly safe. As I mentioned, Tropical Storm Bill is ravaging Texas. It's absolutely flooded. What was amazing is only a few weeks ago, the global warming Nazis were out there saying, Texas is in a permanent drought because of human-caused global warming. So all you people out in California, with your drought, there may be hope. Because as soon as they start screaming it's a permanent drought from global warming, you're going to get a rainstorm. 21 of the world's 37 largest aquifers are running out of water. That's part of the problem. In California, the other part is that 2 of their largest aquifers have become contaminated with fracking fluid. 9 California cities are literally running out of water. This is bad management. There's plenty of water there. They could go up to Lake Tahoe. The infrastructure to transport the water from where it is to where it needs to be has not been maintained. That's a big part of the problem. And as a side note, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate email for this, I wonder how much water all those illegal immigrants are using up. Because that has to be a factor. And they're saying that it is going to get worse. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. Now, we're getting a little bit of good news from the happiest place on earth. We were reporting earlier how Disney had given layoff notices to a bunch of their IT workers and ordered them to train their H-1B foreign replacements. Well, this story went public thanks to the independent media. And the public backlash has caused the Disney organization to cancel the whole idea. The Disney IT workers will be keeping their jobs. Disney's basically telling the workers, just pretend that nothing ever happened. Don't talk to the media. Don't give interviews. Everything's fine. It never really happened. We got Winston Smith to go back and erase all those articles about what we did, so don't you talk about it. I think somewhere in Mickey Mouse's genetic makeup there's still a little bit of rat. Now, the pro-GMO lobby is out there trying to counter the growing awareness that these products are very dangerous and harmful. They're putting pressure on certainly U.S. government agencies and the Congress to outlaw GMO labeling. You just don't want to know. And they're really getting down to some really poor tactics in their propaganda. Their latest one is that anybody opposed to GMO is starving the poor. When Neil Young came out and stated his opposition to GMO and glyphosate, that's how the GMO lobby came out saying Neil Young wants to starve the poor of planet Earth. Organic farming is starving the poor. Only Monsanto can save the world from hunger. Now, the problem with that is it doesn't matter if you're saving the world from hunger if you're in the process giving the world cancers. And second, it is a myth that the GMO crops produce more food than their natural counterparts. They don't. The yields are actually lower. These GMO creations are less resistant to variations in water and weather and can be killed off, where the organic natural varieties will continue to survive. That's what happened in India with the BT cotton disaster. Organic farmers with traditional methods can match the Monsanto GMO seeds in terms of yield. That's the reality. But Monsanto's idea is, if you hate our GMOs, you want the poor to starve around the world. Well, something you need to keep in mind, if they're poor, they can't afford your GMO seeds. They have to use their heritage seeds, say from last year's harvest. They can't afford to buy your new product, can they? Now, there's another article out here from Patriot Rising, and it's pointing out that we know some of the really serious ramifications of GMO and glyphosate. Cancer, the tumors in the rats in that French test, World Health Organization saying that glyphosate is a probable carcinogen. But there may be other effects. And so there's this interesting article in PatriotRising.com talking about how the problem of food allergies is growing in the United States. And right now, 15 million Americans suffer from some form of food allergy, and they're asking if GMOs might be to blame for that as well. Now, Monsanto's attitude is, hey, we've altered the DNA, but that gets destroyed when you cook the food, and they are correct about that. The problem is protein expression directed by the altered genes, where the proteins that you do ingest and try and incorporate into your body may be just a little bit different than what your body is expecting. Because with natural organic food, we have co-evolved with this food for millions of years. And these new designer proteins coming out of the GMO food, where our bodies don't know how to deal with them. And that could be triggering these adverse reactions. And we know that GMOs do produce effects throughout the entire organism, not just the desired effect. Roundup Ready corn has the gene to make it immune to the glyphosate pesticide, but it also has much tougher corn stalks than the natural variety. Farmers who are using Roundup Ready corn have to have Kevlar belted tires on their tractor. This is an unforeseen, unlooked for side effect. And there could be things in that protein chemistry of the organism that nobody, even today, doesn't know that they're there. They may suspect it. That's why Monsanto's cafeteria wasn't serving GMO food. Now, over in Germany, their beekeepers are convinced that the reason for colony collapse disorder is GMO pollen. And here in the U.S., the corporate media has tried to blame the collapse of the beehives on cell phone towers, mites, fungus, all the rest of that. But prior to the colony collapse disorder, there was an article published in Nature magazine that documented how GMO pollen was harmful to benign insect species. In the case of this Nature article, it was the monarch butterfly, which has declined in numbers since the introduction of GMO. And the German beekeepers are convinced what is killing off their bees are these pollens, which are not exactly what the bees' biochemistry is ready to accept. And so there's a coalition of 100,000 German beekeepers are saying we have to stop this GMO cultivation. It's harming our bees. And if we lose the bees, then we lose the ability to pollinate our plants. Of course, that actually works for Monsanto. If all the bees went away, Monsanto gets their monopoly on global food because you have to buy pre-pollinated seeds from them year after year after year. Now, there's been a follow-up on that story about how the U.S. government accidentally shipped live anthrax weaponized spores to several states, a couple of foreign countries. Now it's coming out that apparently this has been going on for quite some time, because apparently the method by which they would render the anthrax spores dead didn't work 100% of the time, and they're aware that there have been incidences of live weaponized anthrax samples being sent out for the last 10 years, this according to the CDC. Now, there's one cool story that I really liked. Okay, we've all seen 3D printing systems, little boxes, we can get out busts, toys, gun parts, whatever. Over in Holland, they've mounted this amazing project. They have these 2 robots with 3D printing heads on them that are building a single metal bridge across a stream. They started at each end. They lay the first piece. They climb onto the first piece. They 3D print the next piece. They keep climbing out. They're going to meet in the middle. When they are done, it's going to be a single piece of metal, 3D printed. This is amazing what this technology can do. I wish I had the resources to play with it, but that's just great. More positive news from science. The probe Philae on the comet is starting to warm up. It's sending home more data, and it looks like they're going to have this thing operational. And because of the accident that put it in this shaded area on the comet, they're now expecting that they may actually get data from when the comet begins to heat up and outgas, and that's something that they weren't anticipating they were going to be able to do. So it's actually going to work out very, very well. Let's see. Meteorologists dismantle Bill Nye's alarmist global warming claims. And by the way, I'm in a debate with another obvious shill regarding the mysterious warm blob in the Pacific, which the carbon Nazis are saying, see, it proves human-caused global warming. And I'm saying, there's a volcano underneath probably. Oh, no, volcanoes can't heat the surface of the ocean. I'm not kidding you. There's actually somebody in there saying, no, volcanoes can't possibly heat the water around them. That's how desperate they are. And let's see, climate change making poison ivy more dangerous, more propaganda. And now they got the Pope in on this. Pope Francis is condemning the global warming deniers here. And what's going on here, this is actually pathetic. Nobody's buying the pseudoscience behind human-caused global warming. Nobody's believing what the government says. So they're literally reaching back to medieval times to get us to go along with the agenda because it's God's will that you pay a carbon tax. And it's God's will that you submit to a global environmental authority. They really are desperate. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got another radio interview I got to do here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay angry. Share what you know with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.